So you may be looking at that and thinking, this guy had no previous seasons in FPL and he ranked 634th in the world. How did he do it? Well, decent captaincy shouts, a little bit of planning, and a whole lot of luck. But if you want to find out more, stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks FPL SC. In today's video, we're going through how I got a top 1000 finish playing what was my first FPL season in probably almost a decade. Coming into the game as a newbie, things that I did that worked in my favor. I'm going to hopefully share that with you, and hopefully some of those things you can take into the upcoming season in the hope of potentially also improving your rank and also winning out your mini leagues. So if you guys enjoy the video, really appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription to the channel. I really appreciate all the support I've had so far on my first FPL video, so hopefully you guys enjoy this one as well. Let's get straight into it. Just here I'm showing a bit of a summary of my 2020-21 seasons. So as I previously referenced, I came 634th in the world last season, and what was my first FPL season in a long time. I have had some previous experience with the game, playing in like 2009 to around 2011, so I wouldn't technically call myself new to the game. I've had some previous experience, but yeah, the whole premise of the video is going to be around coming into the FPL season potentially with a beginner's mindset and how that can actually help you get a really good ranking even if you have been playing the game for a long time. So let's get straight into it. So I think the major tip that came from me coming in as a relative beginner to the game was coming in with no previous bias. You know, I had a bit more of a casual approach to the game in the first few weeks, and I think that really did benefit me. Patrick Bamford is one example. I think everyone knows Patrick Bamford had an amazing season last season, scored like 17 goals. I can't remember how many assists, but he got so many points, and he was 5.5 million at the beginning of the season. I didn't start with Bamford, but I bought him in around game week 3. Essentially, I just saw that he had scored 14 points in his first game, he had scored 8 in his second, and I thought, well, this guy's scoring goals, let me just get him in. I had no, bias around him previously being in the Premier League as someone who was wasteful with chances, etc., which I think might have hindered a few people, bringing him into their team. Obviously, there is an element of luck definitely with that, because he could have flopped very easily and he could have been a wasted transfer. But luckily for me, bringing him in when he was 5.6 million, and I think he ended up around 6.7, that's one element of, being a relative beginner. I didn't have the bias, and I think that's something that obviously, gets talked about a lot, is removing all biases. It is obviously very difficult, but I think the more that you can do that, I think it really helps you jump on some of these players who are performing a little bit earlier than others might. Similar example also with Gundogan. So Gundogan, I had no idea how he performed previously in FPL. I know he's a good player, but it might not have translated well to FPL previously. But we saw last season, around when Kevin De Bruyne got injured, and we saw Gundogan playing a lot more advanced. He was coming into the box late, finishing chances. I saw that after like 2 or 3 games, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. He's 5.5 million playing for Man City, scoring goals. So I just brought him in. I didn't necessarily bring him in like way ahead of everyone else, but I probably bought him like maybe 1 or 2 weeks ahead of when he became really popular. And I think that's all you need sometimes to really get yourself ahead in the rankings. Just 1 or 2 weeks before he became really popular, I was able to get a couple of decent scores out of him, and that just pushes you up the rankings a little bit. And I think the more times that you can do that during the season is obviously going to be better. It doesn't necessarily have to be picking a guy 1 month ahead of when he's going to do better. Just even if you can get him a week or 2 before everyone else, I think that can really help you out. And obviously this did not always work out well for me. Jesse Lingard, who had an amazing end to the season, I got him probably a bit later than most others got all of his points. You're not going to win on every one of these players in terms of jumping ahead of the bandwagon, but I think the more times that you can do it than not, that's really going to be helpful in terms of getting you up in the rankings. Now, my second tip, which I alluded to at the beginning of the video, was captaincy. I mentioned this in my first FPL video, that captaincy is really important in FPL, and I definitely noticed that last season, and I only stuck to the premium players except for when there was exceptional circumstances, like say a blank or a double game week. So you can see there, I didn't captain anyone outside of Salah, Fernandes, Kane, De Bruyne, Son, Bamford, and Gundogan. Bamford and Gundogan were in the double game weeks, but outside of that, all of those guys that I mentioned above are premium players. So that's the reason that you want to have those guys in your team, is for captaincy purposes. I just purely had a very straightforward approach where I had, can I get the best premium player with the best fixture for that week, without maybe taking too many hits? And if I can, then great, I'll just captain them. And I actually ended up with over 600 points from captaincy, and something I alluded to in my first FPL video, it was really helpful in terms of covering up the bad weeks. And on the weeks that you nail a captaincy pick when maybe others don't, that's obviously the best time when you can gain a lot of rankings. Mo Salah basically was the reason why, and obviously everyone remembers his hat-trick he scored in game week 1 last season. I captained him over Aubameyang, purely nothing more than I saw that he was playing at home, and I thought, well, he's playing in a home game, so why don't I captain Salah when I think a lot of people went for Aubameyang, who was playing Fulham away. A similar example with Salah was also when he was playing West Ham around mid-season. I can't remember the other games. I think it was Kane and I think it was Fernandes, but I saw Salah versus West Ham. I heard once stat that previously that fixture had been high scoring, and so I thought, you know what, I'll just go for Salah, premium player. Maybe the fixture on paper isn't the best, and he scored like a double, and I think that particular week also really helped me out in the rankings. But essentially, I didn't really take that many punts in captaincy, in terms of, non-premium players. Yes, I might have taken a punt on Salah captaincy in West Ham, but it was Salah. He's one of the best players in FPL. And so that's something that I would really encourage, and I think that's something that probably can hold true every season, is sticking to your premium players for captaincy and just trying to identify the best fixtures possible. It sounds very simple, but I think if you can stick to that mentality, it should hopefully help you shape your team for the rest of the season. So the next kind of thing that I did last season was I didn't take too many hits. Something I kind of alluded to in my first FPL video is that I'm quite a conservative manager. I don't like taking too many risks. And so in terms of point hits, I didn't take that many during the season. I tried to roll as many transfers as I could. I did take more hits at the beginning of the season, when the game was still very new and exciting to me after coming back for so long, and I was really keen to jump on players. And without knowing, that probably was a better strategy because it helped me build up some team value, hopping on players a bit more frequently. I think that's something that's definitely worthwhile as well. If you are looking to take hits to begin the season, it's not an awful strategy. I think you just have to really be mindful of, the player that you're bringing in. If you are taking a hit, just making sure that it's probably worthwhile. So I tried not to take hits for goalkeepers and defenders, because the chances of them repaying that hit is probably less so. But if you're bringing in a player, who you're potentially going to captain, or maybe someone you've got a really good gut feeling about who potentially can repay the hit, then I'd probably be more likely to do that. Another thing as well, I did take more hits around the double game weeks and the blank game weeks, essentially because if, say for example, in a blank game week, I had a guy who wasn't going to play at all, if I took a hit to get him out for someone who is going to play, and who is going to play the full 90, that's 2 points I'm already getting from. So really kind of look at it as a bit of a -2. And around the double game weeks, I took hits to try to get more players in to really attack those. And so John Stones, I've got here as an example. I brought him in game week 19, absolute legend when he scored that double. I took a -8 that week, and it really paid off. Obviously, that's a big risk, but I think that's something to be mindful of, is that, hits, I think around, those particular weeks where I think the ranking changes can really, really be big, like a blank game week or a double game week, I think that's when they're probably more useful in my opinion. Obviously, that strategy might hold true for this season, it might not. But that's definitely something that worked out well for me last season, and that's something I'm still looking to potentially look to do in the upcoming season as well. Now, this next tip is definitely more of that kind of coming into FPL with a relatively new mindset, was keeping the game really, really simple. Ultimately, I've played a bunch of other fantasy games, and FPL relatively is simple. You get points for goals, assists, clean sheets, and for turning up. If you break it down like that, you do obviously have bonus points, and that in itself is its own technicality, but the actual core point scoring is very, very simple. So I tried to have a really straightforward mindset when it came to FPL. One of those things was not having a very strong bench and, just kind of reducing any of those selection headaches. So to begin the season, I did start with rotating goalkeepers like Matt Ryan and Alex McCarthy, and I was just never able to pick the clean sheet. So ultimately, I just decided to go for one goalkeeper set and forget. Souček is an absolute legend. He's one of those guys who I think pained a lot of owners last season. They always benched his points. I had my team set up from the beginning of the season that he was actually like my fourth midfielder, and so I just had him playing every week. Just set up my team so that I didn't ever have to really bench him, and I was able to capitalize on his returns. That's something I would keep in mind as well. Just try to reduce those selection headaches. Keep it simple for yourself. Another example was also Ruben Dias, who I brought in my wild card in game week 9 or 10. Basically, City defense was starting to look really, really good. The first couple of months of the season, they were leaking some goals, but Ruben Dias came in, and obviously he was that's when the defense really, really improved. They started getting clean sheets, and he looked the most nailed out of any of the City defenders. And so I just kept it simple. I'm like, well, if I want to get a piece of the City defense, just go for the guy who's going to be the most nailed. Like for example, Cancelo, who had such attacking potential, I owned him for 1 week in the entire of last season, but I just kept it simple and went with Dias. Eventually I got in Stones as well, going for the guys who were nailed for 90 minutes in the best defense. Even if it's just 6 points a game, it seems a bit boring, but just having that steady stream of points really, really helped me out. So I think having that bit more of a simplified mentality did help me out last season as well, and I think that's definitely something that we can look to do in the upcoming season. So again, a bit of that newbie kind of tip is that being in Australia with the time zone, it's really hard to watch all of the Premier League games. I barely watched any full games. Mainly I was watching 3 or 10 minute highlights on the weekend, and that's something that did help me in terms of removing any kind of emotional bias. And the reason that I've got Callum Wilson here is that I hear a lot of people say they don't really like watching Newcastle because they're boring, etc. I had Callum Wilson to begin the season because he looked okay on paper. He was scoring goals, but see, I didn't have that attachment of like having to sit through a Newcastle game and watch them, the boring team apparently. I just saw that he was getting goals and assists and I was like, sweet, this guy's getting me points, he's staying in my team. I wasn't kind of riding the highs and lows of watching those 90-minute games. You see a captain and you're just thinking, oh my god, please get into the box, can you please score or something. I had none of that because I was barely able to watch the games. It was always after the fact that, I'd wake up in the morning, I'd see all the scores and then I'm like, all right, let's see, did my player do well? Then I might go and watch the highlights. But just taking out that emotional attachment, I think benefited me greatly. So I guess the fundamental tip that comes out of this is trying to be a bit more objective and also just trying to detach some of the emotion out of it. So I've heard in the UK, this match of the day challenge where people watch all the results of the game at the end of the week and they don't actually watch those games. To me, that sounds quite fun. It's basically what I was doing, after watching some small highlights, but I wasn't able to see the full kind of tactics and all the players. That's when I would listen to, other podcasters who go through each game. That's when I would kind of just bridge that knowledge gap. Or maybe I'd look at some statistics, maybe look at player heat maps and touches just to kind of see where in the field they are. So I think that's definitely one strategy that worked well for me. Probably going to be the same because I'm not going to be able to watch every game overnight. And so I think for anyone who potentially does have more flexibility to watch more games, maybe you could try, detaching yourself a little bit, spending less time watching games and then try to fill in the knowledge gap, with statistics and more objective means, hearing other people's opinions. I think that definitely worked out well for me and maybe that's something that you guys could try as well. If you're new to the channel, you're going to be getting a lot of bad puns from me. The finish and chips, I tried to play it to any of the UK viewers. So I kind of wanted to discuss the chips and how I used them last season. So my first wildcard I actually used in game week 10, and that was when Salah had COVID-19, and so he was going to be out for like 1 to 2 weeks. So I remember having to trade him out, and I got in Fernandes at that time. And in my second wildcard, I used that in game week 31 when there was a big fixture swing to end the season. So I thought it was quite interesting reflecting back on the way that I used my 2 wildcards. The first one, I just used it when I needed it. A big player was missing. I had a couple of other injuries as well, so I thought this is a good time just to kind of refresh the team. Game week 10, I had 2.5 months worth of information, I guess, so I was able to bring in Ruben Dias on my wildcard. I had Kevin De Bruyne, so I had a pretty good midfield of Fernandes, De Bruyne, Son, etc. So I think that's one good thing to look at for this season as well, is to not be so fixated on when to use your wildcard. Maybe just use it when you need it. And so this season upcoming, obviously the transfer window is going to be closing around game week 3, game week 4, and there's a fixture swing in game week 7. So there's a good time to kind of roadmap when you might want to use it. But ultimately, I think if you don't want to really pencil it in my opinion, I think just use it when your team best needs it. But the second wildcard was a good way to show that how you can take advantage of it, because by game week 31, I was sitting around the top 2,000 I think. So I was in a position of strength, but was able to kind of just cement my position by using it when there was a big fixture swing, able to bring in players from Liverpool and Arsenal, etc. when they had a good end to the season, just to kind of cement my spot. So I think that's another good example of how to use your wildcard. My free hit I used in blank game week 18, which paid off well for me because I only had 3 or 4 players, I think of it, some really, really low number of players available in game week 18. So a free hit made perfect sense. And I think I gained around 30 to 35 points on what my old team would have. And so that's a relatively straightforward one where probably I'm going to do the same this season, where if it's a blank game week and when you've barely got any players that you can field, I think going for a free hit, which just lets you cover that week very well, is probably the way I'm going to go about it. The bench boost I used in double game week 19. This bench boost was a fail. I only got 7 points. This was when Leeds were versing Brighton, and I got 2 points from all of my Leeds players. And I had Sam Johnson, the West Brom goalkeeper, and he missed the first game with COVID. So my bench boost was a fail. That's a good example of, the chips, they don't always work for you, but I wouldn't hold so much stock with them because even me, I had a horrible bench boost scoring 7 points. My triple captain, which I used in game week 26 on Harry Kane, I think he scored 8 points. Neither of them did, exceptionally well for me, but I was still able to get a good ranking. So I think that's something that I've heard in other content creators, that they've put too much time and effort into changing their team around the chips, but ultimately it just didn't pay off for them. So I think that's one thing I'm looking to do this season as well, is to not be so concerned about maximizing the chips, just more using them when I think they're going to be best appropriate for the team. Obviously I will do some planning around when to best use them, but probably not hold so much stock into them. And just in terms of how I finished the season, I found it a lot easier to take risks towards the latter half of the season. Obviously, you've got a lot more information at that point in time. Sadio Mane, who I bought for 1 week in the entire season in game week 38 when he scored that double, obviously that really, really helped me. Basically, I had no Bruno Fernandes, so it made sense just to take a bit of a punt on a Sadio Mane. And I think towards the end of the season, either when you're chasing, say, for a higher rank or chasing a mini league, or even if you're trying to cement a position if you're at a really high rank like I was, I think you feel a bit more comfortable taking the punts because you've got some security of being already in a good rank, and you've just got more information available. So I think I'll try to maximize punts in the second half of the season, and not so much in the first half, when I think we're still trying to gather information about players and teams, etc. That's one thing I would advise in terms of, if you are looking to chase differentials, it probably is a little bit easier in the second half of the season. So that's it, guys. Those are my kind of 6 takeaways that I got from last season that really helped me get a good ranking. Hopefully some of those things you can also take in the next season. I think, interestingly enough, the main ones that I really liked was not coming in with any bias, not being able to watch a lot of the games really did help me. So I think if you're trying to change up your approach to FPL, hopefully this gave you a new perspective that you can take into the 2021-22 season. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Do appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next video.